Years from now in the Louvre, there's going to be an exhibit titled Work in 2024. In that exhibit, you'll see a framed Slack message that just says, "Hey," a 15-minute calendar invite titled Quick Sync, a man whose afternoon is spent commenting "congrats" on his colleagues' LinkedIn posts, and a manager who gets to 5 p.m. and realizes they've done nothing with the day besides check email. Does this sound like your job? Well, it's time for you to join the revolution. Hey, this is Alex with Guys Can Read, and in today's book report, we're taking back Sunday and the rest of the week with Cal Newport's Deep Work. In this video, I'll give a summary of Deep Work and its key concepts, talk a little bit about what brought me to this book and why I picked it up, share some of my favorite exercises that Cal Newport suggests over the course of the book, run through a few of my favorite quotes from Deep Work, and as always, suggest who might like the book. Before jumping in though, I would love it if you could take a moment, like this video, and subscribe to Guys Can Read on YouTube. This way, you'll get notified when new book reports come out. Now, it's time to go deep. Deep Work starts off with the following idea. Lots of people spend time on dumb, small things during the workday, which destroys the ability to get any meaningful stuff done. These include things like emails, meetings, status updates, general housekeeping, you name it. Cal Newport, the author, calls this type of activity shallow work. His real definition of shallow work is non-cognitively demanding, logistical-style tasks, often performed while distracted. These efforts tend not to create much new value in the world and are easy to replicate. And then, by contrast, he defines deep work. Professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. His examples of shallow work are shared by a lot of disciplines. Emails, meeting, social media, whatever, basically in common across a lot of industries. But his examples of deep work are very industry or function specific. It could be analyzing a data set, writing code, writing an article or book, designing a building, or doing graphic design. But you'll find that these examples of deep work are very domain specific. Newport then goes on to talk about why deep work is becoming so important. His first point is that it's becoming increasingly rare due to social media, constant distraction, you name it. And then his other point is that deep work is becoming increasingly valuable. And I'll revisit this idea later, but the gist of it is that deep work can help you quickly master hard things and can also help you produce at an elite level in terms of both quality and speed. On top of being important, deep work also provides a lot of meaning for you. And this is pretty easy to figure out, right? On your happiest days of work, were you doing routine, logistical stuff? Or were you heads down focused on something truly challenging? If you're like me, my best days of work weren't accompanied by paper pushing.
What would you say you do here?
After the introduction Newport provides in part 1, basically defining deep work, we get into the later sections of the book, which are tips and sort of a how-to guide for doing deep work. Each of the following principles gets its own section. Principle number 1 is work deeply. Principle number 2 is embrace boredom. Principle number 3 is quit social media. And principle number 4 is drain the shallows. In Work Deeply, Newport discusses 4 depth philosophies, which govern how you get your deep work done. For example, is it once a day for a couple hours? Or is it once a year for a few months? Or anywhere in between? Is it once an hour for a few minutes at a time? All of these have different deep work methodologies that Newport details in this section. Then, after reviewing the 4 depth philosophies, Newport gives a couple tips on how to work deeply, and I'll get into 1 or 2 of those later in this book report. In the embrace boredom section, principle number 2, Newport advocates for taking breaks from focus rather than taking breaks from distraction, i.e., make deep work and focus the rule rather than the exception. Basically, this section is all about how you use your non-deep work time. And Newport reiterates in this section that it's not always a bad thing to be bored. Said another way, you could read that as, it's not always a bad thing to be not stimulated. The next principle, quit social media. It's fairly obvious what's in that section. Newport talks about why this can be helpful and how the benefits of Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc., whatever they may be, often are outweighed by the negative consequences that you get from using these social media tools. The last part of the quit social media section, Newport advocates that people put a little more thought into how they spend their free time. And a bit of a spoiler for this subsection, Newport basically says that you don't need to turn off at the end of the workday. You just need to find a different task with which you can work deeply or put thought into. For example, hobbies. In the last principle of deep work, drain the shallows, Newport talks about how to get rid of as much shallow work as possible. One idea he gives readers is to schedule every minute of their day. This is easier than it sounds, and I'll get into it later. He also recommends requesting a shallow work budget from your manager, basically coming to an agreement on how much shallow work you should be doing and what types of things you should continue to prioritize with your deep work. And as the last suggestion in this section, Newport talks about how you can become hard to reach and ask your coworkers to do more work when they email you or send you some other kind of a request. So there's a ton of actionable stuff here in deep work, and I'll dig into some of my favorites later on. But before I get to that, quick bit on why I picked up deep work. This book was actually recommended to me by my dad some years back, since he had a similar career as a marketing exec to what I had previously as a program manager at a tech company. Even before I read this book, I was playing around with some of the concepts in it, though. I was commonly lamenting, there's not enough time for real work, or I would ignore instant messages from my coworkers on Slack or GChat, instead opting to be heads down on a specific task for a couple hours. One of the companies I worked for was so meeting intensive that my boss and I had an hour brainstorming session to figure out what meetings we could get out of. Shallow work kills people. But in reading deep work, I think what I got most out of it wasn't why I read it or what I was hoping to get out of it. The main takeaway that I had wasn't how to do more deep work, but instead, Newport really impressed upon me the importance of deep work. Newport's message of deep work will define winners in the new economy really resonated with me. And I'm going to be doing more to emphasize more deep work time as a result of reading this book. Okay, and now I'll get to some of my favorite exercises that Newport recommends. Newport gives a ton of ways in this book to improve your deep work habits or otherwise open yourself up for more time for deep work. By far the most actionable part of this book, it seems right to spend time talking about a couple of these methods here. And the first of these that I'll go into is meditate productively. Defined by Newport, the goal of productive meditation is to take a period in which you're occupied physically but not mentally, and focus your attention on a single, well-defined professional problem. Quick side note, the number of people who have written about productivity and would advocate for the power of a walk is staggering. I can think of 3 off the top of my head. Newport does a good job of summarizing that advocacy here with productive meditation. Personally, I run a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, to no one's surprise, and I've used the treadmills at my local gym to plan game sessions for a few months now. Newport gives 2 specific tips in regards to productive meditation, though. First off, be wary of distractions and looping. Ipso facto, if you notice that you start to reiterate like one thought in your mind over and over, or your mind begins to wander during productive meditation, take a pause to reorient yourself. Otherwise, it just spins in a loop and it's not very productive meditation. The second tip he gives is to structure your deep thinking. Have a plan for how and what you're thinking about during this productive meditation. And then Newport also recommends identifying variables to whatever problem you're thinking about, then defining next step questions, then consolidating thinking after answering those first 2 pieces. This is how Newport recommends structuring productive meditation, and it might work for you too. The second exercise I'll talk about here is a 30-day social media diet. I'm sure you've heard of some equivalent of this before, but this next activity was inspired by Ryan Nicodemus, who's one of the co-hosts of the Minimalists podcast. His original version of the exercise involved physical goods. As if he were moving, he took all of his belongings and packed them into moving boxes, as if he were preparing to move. But then, over the course of a week, if he needed something from one of those boxes, he would take it out. And then at the end of the week, he found that he had all this stuff that he had accumulated, but that he didn't need it all over the course of a week. What did he do after that? Bye-bye stuff. And Cal Newport actually proposes a similar strategy for reducing your use of social media. You can begin this exercise by signing out, but not deactivating, your social media for 30 days. Also important, don't tell anybody that you're deactivating it. If someone reaches out in another way, not on social media, to ask what's up and why you haven't been posting, you're welcome to answer, but the goal is not to telegraph to other people that you are taking this 30-day break from social media. Then, after the 30 days without, you can ask the 2 following questions of each social media service. So you would go do this for Twitter and Facebook and Reddit and whatever else. The first question, would the last 30 days have been notably better if I had been able to use this service? The second question, did people care that I wasn't using this service? Now, if the answer to both of these questions is no, Newport actually recommends getting rid of the service permanently. The next activity is to schedule every minute of every day. I did promise I was going to talk about this one because it sounds hairy, but I promise you it's not. Newport leads into this section by citing some stats on how most people underestimate the time that they spend watching TV and overestimate how much time they spend working, which should underscore the point that we're on autopilot a lot and think we're doing one thing when we're actually doing another. To correct this, Newport suggests scheduling every hour of your day. Basically, take a virtual calendar or align a sheet of paper and assign your day in blocks. So, for example, if you need 2 hours to complete a report, you would name that block Complete Report. When you actually start your day after building the schedule, your estimates will occasionally be wrong and can't move distractions or interruptions are going to come up. That's okay, these things are fine and natural, but you should be reordering your schedule when these things happen, not abandoning it completely. Newport gives 2 additional tips to help with this time blocking of your schedule. First off, be very liberal with how much time you're giving to certain activities that are going to take longer than you think. And second tip, use overflow conditional blocks. If you don't know how long an activity is going to take, throw an extra half-hour buffer on the end, just in case it ends up taking more time than you thought it would originally. My own 2 cents here, I almost do this every day in my own schedule. At the very least, it keeps me focused on the important stuff and ensures I don't spend every free minute checking my email, which is going to result in me doing a whole lot of nothing. The final exercise that Newport talks about, or really it's sort of a strategy of deep work, is to make grand gestures. You want to get a lot of deep work done? Sometimes you have to commit to the bit. And if you ever had to cram in college for a midterm or final, I'm guessing this is something you've done before. If not in this exact version, you've done something like it. Newport has observed with some great creatives and other workers that making a grand gesture is sometimes conducive to getting a lot of deep work done. Making this gesture is a sort of psychological trick, operating similarly to a positive version of the sunk cost fallacy, which says, I've committed myself fully with this gesture. I have no choice now but to give my work the utmost focus and attention. The first example of making the grand gesture that Cal Newport gives is actually of not so beloved anymore author J.K. Rowling. She was finishing the 7th Harry Potter book, The Deathly Hallows. Rowling was struggling to write at her home office, so she took extreme action to shift her mindset into writing and checked herself into a suite in the 5-star Balmoral Hotel in Edinburgh, Scotland. Not only did this radically change her normal environment, but also paired with a significant financial investment of about $1,000 a day, this helped her brain say, okay, it's time to get down to work. Rowling was quoted as saying, I came to this hotel because it's a beautiful hotel, but I didn't intend to stay here. The first day's writing went so well that I kept coming back, and I ended up finishing the last of the Harry Potter books here. The next example of making the grand gesture that Newport gives is Bill Gates, the former CEO of Microsoft, who was famous for taking a think week. During these think weeks, he would leave behind his normal work and family obligations, retreat to a cabin somewhere up in the woods with nothing but a stack of papers and books. And as far as what I've done to make the grand gesture in the past, I ended up paying out of pocket for a WeWork space in 2023 because I wasn't able to always shift into my work mindset while I was in my apartment. Work from home is a kind of double-edged sword, I felt, and it's tough sometimes to feel like you're working when you're sitting in the same building that you eat, sleep, and play in. And then during college, my favorite spot to study was a coffee shop, a 30-minute drive outside of campus. My bedroom or kitchen table would have worked fine, but the act of driving to that cafe really got me into the study mindset more times than not. And those are just a couple grand gestures I've made in the past that have helped me commit to deep work. For this next section, as usual, I'm going to dive into a couple of my favorite quotes from deep work. The first of these comes from a New York Times column by David Brooks, which I'll link in the description. Brooks is quoted in deep work regarding the importance of routine to creatives. And in that New York Times column, he's quoted as saying, "You're primarily struck by the fact that creative people organize their lives according to repetitive, disciplined routines. They think like artists, but work like accountants." I'm sure there's some exceptions that prove the rule here. There always are. But I love this quote. If you want to do really good work, start to incorporate some routine in your days. The second quote is couched in the section on rule number 3, embrace boredom. In this subsection, specifically, Newport argues the case for not using the internet for entertainment. It sounds pretty drastic in 2024, but this quote from Arnold Bennett, an English writer in the early 1900s, kind of sold me on it. The quote is, "One of the chief things which my typical man has to learn is that the mental faculties are capable of a continuous hard activity. They do not tire like an arm or a leg. All they want is change, not rest, except in sleep." Hot take alert. from Arnold Bennett in the year 19-something. I haven't A-B tested this yet, so I can't say with certainty that I agree, but I will say that the vegging I claim to need a lot of the time doesn't always leave me as refreshed as I hoped it would. And this next quote is actually one of Newport's principles that comes up over the course of this book. Not the principles of deep work, just principles. But I haven't found a good place in the book report to talk about it yet, so we're going to talk about it here in favorite quotes. The principle in question is the principle of least resistance, and Cal Newport defines this as, in a business setting, without clear feedback on the impact of various behaviors to the bottom line, we will tend towards behaviors that are easiest in the moment. Now, let's unpack that for a minute. At a high level, Newport is saying that when you're not sure what the impact of your activities are to the bottom line of the business, by default, you're going to end up doing the easiest thing. In 2024, I would argue a lot of jobs will result in people tending towards the easiest thing by that logic, because in 2024, it's increasingly difficult to tie whatever work you are doing to the bottom line of the company. Now, that leaves the question, what is the easiest thing? I hate to beat a dead horse here, but a lot of times it's going to be email. Newport says email is easy because you can get fast answers by using it. And email is also easy because it enables you to run your day out of your inbox. I don't know about you, but I feel targeted by that quote. The number of days I've run my schedule out of okay, I have these 5 emails to respond to. I'll confess to it. I've done it. And finally, who should read Deep Work? Man, oh man. I'd say it's just about everyone. Because it's universal, right? I mean, if you're a knowledge worker or you want to become one, this book applies to you at your job. Even if you're not a knowledge worker, but you have a hobby that you're into or something you do in your spare time beyond Netflix and surfing the web, then you could probably benefit from deep work in that part of your life too. Newport also argues early in the book that being good at deep work will be critical to your ability to thrive in today's economy. And I would have to agree. At some point, I'll ship a book report on Kai-Fu Lee and Chen Qiufan's AI 2041, which will talk more about this. But at a high level, a lot of the low-skilled jobs that we have today are going to be automated by AI before we know it. And deep work can help you learn the skills to survive automation. Or even in lieu of automation, deep work can help you learn the skills to advance in your career. That said, deep work applies to just about everybody. If you need me to be more specific about who I'd recommend this book to, I think this book will jive well with everyone and anyone who enjoys productivity books a la Atomic Habits, 4,000 Weeks, The 5 a.m. Club, or productivity-censored podcasts like The Tim Ferriss Show. If, on the other hand, you derive nothing from this genre and bristle against attempts from other people to get you to read self-help books, you can let this one be. Deep Work is almost a 50-50 split of philosophy about productivity and real-world tools and applications for the stuff that you find in this book. So said differently, this is a quintessential self-help book. And if those aren't your thing, that's okay. You can skip Deep Work. The only other thing I'd add here is that I think this book will hit particularly hard for anybody working in the tech industry. Many more industries can appreciate it than that, but a lot of the talk of email versus real work and so on felt really applicable to me for the 8.5 years that I spent in tech. And there you have it. That's Deep Work by Cal Newport. Where do you go from here? Well, for starters, I'd love it if you could like this video and subscribe to the Guys Can Read channel on YouTube. It helps out the channel and tells me that I'm not yelling about books into the void. Then, if you think that talking about this book or others with a group of guys nationwide sounds cool, you are in luck. Use the Google form linked in the description to sign up for the Guys Can Read mailing list and or join a live, in-person book club discussion in your city. And finally, if you find yourself wanting to read the book reviewed in this video, go and check out the video description for a link to the Guys Can Read page on bookshop.org. We are an affiliate partner and receive a small percentage of revenue from book sales through our shop on the site. That's all, but thanks again, and see you next time.